this morning, Brother Jonathan Alchin. 27. The theme is staying the way. And to lead us in reading Acts 27, we're going to ask Brother John Thomas. Now, brothers and sisters, we come to the time for exhortation, for words, encouragement and enlightenment. Invite Jon Alchin to lead us in words of exhortation.
Well, good morning, everyone, and just like the Brother John who read for us this morning, let's hope my voice makes it through today. A little bit of sickness going around, and that's not good for anyone, so got distance here. So, the reading we had this morning, Acts 27, it's a linking chapter. It links the time between the Apostle Paul being captured in Jerusalem, going through the scenarios of the local Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, etc., trying to organise his death via the Romans, and then him getting to Rome. So it's just a linking chapter, but it's very exciting in what it happens from that reading that we had this morning. And it got me thinking in relation to this whole connection between one and the other. It's a bridging chapter, we're in water, we've got a lot of things going on like that. So the first time we actually find out about ships in the Bible, do a quick little search in your Bible, you'll find out it's in Genesis chapter 49, where in verse 13 it talks about the blessing for Zebulun, that he would be a haven for ships. Interesting. Zebulun, obviously where the tribe was going to be a safe place for ships. Now, the definition of a ship is interesting. Most people would say that the difference between a boat and a ship is that a ship can carry a boat, but a boat can't carry a ship. But it's really got to do with the way it carries burdens. A ship can carry things. A ship can do certain activities that generally boats are more for leisure or for fishing that we find. So a ship is a fantastic thing. We go on through the Old Testament, we find that Solomon made a navy of ships so that he could go and get gold, and not really sure what happened to those ships. In 1 Kings 22, verse 48, Jehoshaphat made ships and they were to go for gold as well. And if you compare that to 2 Chronicles 20:37, he also was making ships to go to that Jehoshaphat organised. The problem with Jehoshaphat's ships is they were wrecked and destroyed prior to them going off their journeys to do that. Now, there's a whole series of reasons potentially why that occurred, but in Jehoshaphat's mind, you'd have to go to Psalm 107 and verse 23, and that says that there is good business in ships. So if you're into the shipping world, you need to know that business in ships, it's how people make their money. So like us here, we somehow have food on the table and we are into business, as it were. So if that someone provides us some extra money to be able to survive. Now, when we come to Acts 27, we have Paul going through a shipwreck. We find that over a number of days, let's call it maybe 30 days, 25 days of this chapter, that this chapter goes for, that Paul jumps on the first ship because this centurion had organised it, Centurion Julius, and for those who like a different theme from today's exhort, was actually thinking of having one called shampoo and conditioner, because Julius' name means soft hair. And obviously, you know, his mother thought he was soft-haired when he was born and hoped that stayed for the rest of his life. But Paul, via Julius's direction, gets put on a ship in Caesarea. Caesarea, coastal town of Israel, goes up the coast for one day and lands in a place called first stop Sidon. And Sidon, in distance-wise, means that boat, ship, talking it, is doing about 4.5 knots, which is about right for the speed of a old displacement-sized vessel. Now, we don't know the size of this first ship, we know the size of the second ship roughly, because the second ship has 276 people on it. Now, between start of time and about 1900, it's actually about 1852 when cargo ships started made, but up to that point of time, boats were generally built of one description and one size. Sometimes they had different decks inside, and if you wanted to go back and look, in the Australian First Fleet that came out here, we had two ships that carried about 276 people in that First Fleet, and so we can look at the size of those ships. So right, those ships carried that people. How big are these boats talking about? Well, this hall luckily is roughly the size, about a quarter of the size of that ship. So it's about 1.5 times wide and about two and a bit times long, this hall, okay? Now, obviously we've got bows and elms on the end, and we don't know whether they had different decks inside, because when the Australian First Fleet came out, the two boats that could carry those 280 odd people, one had 2 decks, one had 3 decks. So they're roughly the same size, but they're built differently. So we're guessing in relation to what this boats or these ships that Paul was on, how they were actually built, not built, but they were a displacement style boat, which means basically they float, of course they're displacing water. You therefore need sails or an option to power that boat along. Diesel didn't really get put into ships until 1911, thereabouts. And if you want to look at putting steel hull boats like we have today, well, they didn't really, again, first one was actually here in Newcastle, DeLunga, in Australia. That was in place and was made for moving coal around, surprise, surprise. And given we've still got a lot of coal ships hanging up in port, they're slightly bigger than what these would have been back in the day. Big ships today, there's a whole series. We've all got, they've all got different names, but basically the big ships, the ones that come into Newcastle, are what we call basically Panamax, so the Newcastle Maxi come into Newcastle, it's a certain size that you're allowed to bring in, and they're about 100 metres shorter, they're about 300 metres long, they're about 100 metres shorter than the biggest ones, which we call Cape size, because they have to go Cape instead of going to Panama now, and those ones carry iron ore these days. So go across to Western Australia, you can see those coming into Bedland, somewhere like that, the iron ore. Sometimes they're bale size and a whole other series of things, but these ships are really important for business. This is how the world worked back in the day. They were built around ports and transport routes. The world needed things to be moved around, and including prisoners. So prisoners in this early time needed to go to Rome for judgment. well, Paul did, and attached to him were some free people, like Luke, who enjoyed journeys and so shipwrecks Paul. And we find in 2 Corinthians that Paul had suffered 3 shipwrecks in chapter 25, and trying to work out when 2 Corinthians was written, therefore this probably is 4th shipwreck. Great. Thanks, Luke, for coming along with me. Is Luke the bad luck or is Paul the bad luck in relation to shipping? So they set off up the coast, and their first boat, and the first boat, see there is a boat of Adramyttium. That's sort of up near Turkey, Greece, up there, just about 100 kilometres south of the Dardanelles area, up those who put that on a map. And that ship and sailor and owner, as we find that most of these boats, the captain of the ship is also the owner of the ship, as per the second boat. That person would go from port to port looking for goods to be able to buy, and then move to another port which they would be able to sell at that time. They would also look for passengers which pay their way, and the centurion obviously had to pay for the boarding of those people to get them across to Rome. Interesting scenario as to what he was actually trying to do and coordinate, but he had a method of managing people that is interesting for those of us who are in positions of employment, being others. He was a consultative style manager. He listened to those people he was trying to manage, such as Paul, such as the owner of the ship, such as the other soldiers, and he would take their ideas on board, as it were, and then make a decision. And it was quite interesting that in one day, putting Paul on a boat, he gives him freedom to go and visit brothers and sisters outside. So he's been put in chains for 2 years while Jerusalem down to Caesarea, but as soon as he's outside that realm, the centurion, under his management style, says, Paul's not a threat. Paul can go off and visit brothers and sisters, and he'll be coming back in chains so he could go back to the next part of the journey. Interesting style of management, that he had confidence that he was going to go and escape within that first day. So then they travel through various ports, and then they have to choose a second ship. Read there in Acts 27 that first part of that second ship journey was rather slow. For those of us who are in business, sometimes business does get slow, and it's tough. And we still have to keep going somehow. Obviously, the winds at that point of time were not conducive to business, and people were struggling in what they were doing. They then come down to Fair Havens, lovely name for that port, and interesting scenario there. So they're going to, well, they switched ship, and the second ship from Egypt, Alexandria, as it were. And again, the centurion has made a choice which ship he's going to get onto, where it's going to go, what time it's going to go there, and try and arrive in Rome. The centurion, at this point of time, has a choice. Is he going to listen to the word of God through Paul? Or is he going to listen to the owner and the captain of the ship? In the NIV there it read pilot, but the captain of the ship decides that they want to port. They want to get to the other end of Crete, and from there they would stay there for a period of winter. It said there that it was just after the time of Pentecost, which meant that storms and other activities in the Mediterranean would be increasing. It was not no longer safe for sailing, as it were. And as they got some good winds, they thought that God was with them, and that their ambitions were that they were going to get to where they wanted to be. But shortly after that, and for those of us who have done any sailing out there on the waters, we know that at certain times winds can change very rapidly. So we've got a lake just down here, and time you can almost set your watch by a nor'easter that will blow in. So you can tell very quickly that wind can change. And that's essentially what happened. This easterly storm, or nor'easter, it's in variations. Easterly storm, nor'easter storm in the King James Version. It's named Rochdon. It was a storm in this scenario that lasted 14 days, at least, maybe slightly more. But it said that they had eaten for 14 days at one point of that journey. Now, locally here we've had some big storms. Had storms where a boat washed up on Nobby's Beach, 2007, Asher Bowl. And that's a rather interesting thing because it was a bulk carrier that washed up, and here we have a bulk carrier that's also washed up. And it was actually rather interesting that they almost did exactly the same thing, and they got into the same sort of trouble. So what happens is they start day one, think, we're going to have to throw some cargo out. So all of a sudden, the business that we've been trying to do, remember that Psalm 107 says there's business in ships, we've got to throw out our business that we've got. We've got to throw off our burdens. We've got to throw off and somewhat rely on the things we've got now to push us in the right directions. And it says, well, hang on a minute, we're going to go down and hit quicksands. Quicksands are down on the top of Africa. So the ship's gone from Cyprus to Africa at one point. Then we find that it's up in the Adriatic Sea, which is between Greece and Italy, that sort of point. It's gone back up that direction. So over 14 days, this boat is no longer doing the standard 4.7 knots. It's probably doing about 8 or 9 knots, which is far faster than the boat was able to go, which is interesting on a whole series of stress things to sailing engineers, etc., that this boat is going far beyond its limits. And as they say, a boat is safe in a harbour, but they're not built for harbours. And it somehow managed to survive this far. As they lighten the boat, the problem you then have is the sides of the boat become like sail. Wind hits the side of your boat and you get directed whichever way that's going. It also means that there's less waves breaking on top of the boat, less water getting into your goods. They've already thrown cargo overboard. Find out later they didn't throw the bit over till later. But at this point of time, now starting to find that this is a metaphor for life, and particularly ecclesial life, is what we're starting to find out this ship is going to be all about. So the ship has to deburden itself of world business. We then have to rely on the good luck, as it were, or the direction that God is going to be able to push the ecclesia in which direction it's going to go. We also find that the ecclesia, as it were, has a time of fellowship, because the apostle there breaks bread and joins with the whole lot in breaking bread and prayer for everyone, and they all joined in and ate at that time. But what's more concerning is at the very last part of this chapter, that soldiers wanted to kill other people that were ship. So remember, we had basically four classes of people on the ship. We had the sailors, merchant sailors, we had the soldiers, we had prisoners, and we had free people there. Just like an ecclesia has lots of different people on board. We all have different journeys that we're going through, but one group wanted to destroy another within the boat. They'd already heard from the Apostle Paul that there was going to be no loss of life in relation to this. Yet they didn't see that out. We'd already heard that they had fellowshiped together with the Apostle Paul, breaking of bread and eating. But they didn't feel that way to sisters. And so what we need to see is that this ship, that as it is a metaphor for, as I'm saying here, spiritual life. We need to be aware of what's going on within our ecclesia. And we should be looking to make sure that everyone gets from one part of the journey to the other part, from the beginning of where we're starting to go from and where we're going to. Let's hope that there is not a shipwreck for ecclesias in addition to that, but there is going to be some difficult times. There's going to be storms that come along. There's going to be times when we need to work out what is important to keep on board our ship. Are we going to be throwing out the extra baggage components that we've got? We first threw out the cargo, then we threw out the tack ship. We then cut off anchors and got rid of the lifeboat. We are definitely there in needing to rely on things of our God. Other aspects of our shipping. Well, there was no search and rescue crew for this voyage. The last big storm that we've had really in Australia that went for a number of days was actually back in late December, and there was a boat race that was to go from Sydney to Hobart, and off sailed, and they hit a big storm just off Bass Strait, and search and rescue went out and rescued many people. There was some loss of life, many bones of those people on the boat. But that storm went for about 6 or 7 days. A storm that's going to go for 14 days or more is really going to work out who you are and what is important to you and your life. What was steering that ship is the rudder. And in James we hear that the tongue is like rudder, steer the course of a person's life. The problem with lightening a ship is that rudder gets out of the water. Pretty much what happened to Passion. They pumped out the water too early, steered the ship, storm, and it pushed up. The winds were blowing against the side of the ship. So pretty much what was happening here. Little rudder, our tongue as it were, James, can change the course, the boat, the ship, how we're going to end ecclesial life, as it were. So we need to be careful in relation to the way in which we work, in which we talk. We need to be off. So we need to be considering what we determine is a safe place. See, in the storm, the ship is a safe place. The ecclesia is a safe place. But what they're aiming for at the end of this is an imaginary safe place on this little island. They're after a small inlet on the beach. They a sudden decide to go that direction. So if our ecclesia world, ecclesia is going through pressure, through strife, through trials, through tribulations, what do we think is that safe haven? What do we think is that safe harbour? Well, our safe harbour is our God. It's going to care, protect, guide, love. It says there that in chapter that not one hair of their head be lost that day, even though they were about to jump to the ocean and try to make it to shore on bits of broken ship. So, if God was going to care for a number of people in a shipwreck, get to safety, in the Apostle Paul and 4 times, get to safety, He's going to look after us in these times that we've got. It's going to be tough out there. It's going to be, as the years go by, it's going to get tougher. Really sorry to the newly baptised to inform you of that, but life is going to get tough. And you need to know what you actually stand for. You need to know ecclesia stands for, and particularly that you need to know that your ecclesia is going to try to protect you and keep you safely to the end of the journey. So, as a metaphor of Acts 27, I think it's good for us to consider it's more than just getting Paul to Rome to stand for Caesar. He's told he's going to do that, and that's what he ended up doing. There was plenty going on around, but wherever he was with God, there was going to be that safety of his journey. So encouragement for each one of us to stay the journey. It's going to be tough out there. The ecclesia is going to be able to help us flow through those issues of life. So let's hope there's a bit of plain sailing ahead of us, and